Hello, and welcome to the Philosophy Weekly podcast. I am your host, Clay Pfeiffer, and this is the podcast where every week we dive into a new philosophy topic. This week, we have a very interesting topic, that being the famous trolley problem. So without further ado, let's hop right in. I would like to first introduce the trolley problem to you, and for those of you who may be unaware of what exactly the trolley problem is. So the trolley problem is a philosophical thought experiment that is used to explore ethical dilemmas. It presents a hypothetical situation in which a person is placed in a position where they have to make a moral decision, often involving a choice between two options, neither of which is ideal. And the trolley problem is typically presented as follows. Imagine you are standing beside a railway track, and you see a runaway trolley hurtling towards a group of five people who all are tied to the track. You are too far away to do anything to save them from the track, but you do notice that there is a lever next to you that you can divert the trolley onto a different track. However, on this different track, there is only one person tied up. You have to make a decision. You can either do nothing and allow the trolley to hit and kill those five people, or you can choose to pull the lever and divert the trolley, saving the lives of the five people, but sacrificing the life of the one person on the other track. Very, very interesting, very hard choice. So the trolley problem is often used as a way to explore different ethical theories and their implications. For example, a consequentialist might argue that pulling the lever is the right thing to do because it will result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. A deontologist, on the other hand, might argue that pulling the lever is not morally permissible because it involves using the one person on the other track as means to an end and saving the other five people. There are also plenty of variations on the trolley problem that introduce additional factors such as the identity of the people on the tracks. For an example of this is some version of the of the trolley problem asks the person to consider whether they pull the lever of the group with five people were all convicted criminals who have all killed people before, or while the other person on the track that they are diverting to, the one person, is a doctor who has saved many lives and has the potential to save many more lives. So it all makes it very, very interesting. But the trolley problem in itself is all, no matter what variation you go on to, it's all the same. It all is the same thought experiment. So with that, the trolley problem has become a very popular discussion in philosophy, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. It is often used to explore the limits of ethical decision making and to examine the factors that influence all of our moral judgments, which vary quite a bit depending on which view you are looking through. While it is unlikely that most people will ever find themselves in a situation like the one presented in the trolley problem, it remains a valuable tool for exploring ethical dilemmas and principles that underlie our decision making in our lives today. Okay, so I have just explained to you the trolley problem. As you can tell, it's a lot. It is a lot, and it's a very, very much open to interpretation. With it being open to so much interpretation, and as I'm sure you can guess, like I mentioned before, there are a lot of different variation and outcomes based on which views you most commonly align with yourself. So, with there being so many views and so many outcomes, and not so much outcomes, I would say, but different conclusions one can make on whether you should pull the lever or not pull the lever. So, with all that being said, I would like to introduce some views of the trolley problem to you. So, a lot of these views I got from Ishawara Sandeep from her website. It's a really good website where she goes through and explains a bunch of viewpoints, and what their viewpoint is, and how she thinks, um, based on their views, how they would react to the trolley problem. So the first one she goes over is utit- sorry, excuse me, utilitarianism. This ethical theory focuses on maximizing overall happiness or pleasure and minimizing overall pain or suffering. So, the utilitarian perspective, the person should divert the trolley onto the track of the one person since this would result in the greatest overall happiness. Since It is one person versus five, and since five people would greatly outweigh the happiness of the sadness even of the one person for getting hit by the trolley, uh, you should pull the lever as there is more happiness gained. Another view is the deontology view. This ethical theory emphasizes the importance of following moral rules and principles regardless of the consequences. So, from this perspective, the person should not divert the trolley, since this action would involve intentionally harming an innocent person. And they shouldn't, even though it's one versus five, since you are making the choice, it is not morally ethical from this point of view. So, you should not, in their view, you should not pull the lever. Another view is virtue ethics. This ethical theory focuses on developing virtuous character traits such as compassion and empathy, and using these traits to guide ethical decision making. From a virtue ethics perspective, the person should consider the specific circumstances of the situation and act in accordance with this virtuous character. So this is where the identity of the people on the tracks comes in. So like I mentioned before, if the five people tied to the tracks were all criminals in jumpsuits and they were escapees from prison, and then the one person on the diverted track was a doctor who has saved many lives and is still young and still has the possibility to save much more lives, virtue ethics tells us that we should divert the trolley as it would be more virtuous, and we consider the specific circumstances of the situation and act in accordance with their virtuous character. Lastly, the last view I'm going to cover today, it would be the moral particularism. This ethical theory rejects the idea of universal moral rules or principles and instead emphasizes the importance of context and individual judgment in ethical decision making. So, from a morale particularist perspective, the person should carefully consider the details of the scenario and make decisions based on their best judgment. So, this really leaves the door open for um, you if you were aligned in the views of moral particularism, because it would really, but there, how do I want to say this? There's really no wrong decision. You just take what you know at the time, your best judgment at the time, and make a decision based on that best judgment, and that is the right decision based on what you know at the time. So these are just a few of the different views on the trolley problem, and there are many other ethical theories and perspectives that could be applied to this scenario. So now that we understand some of the different viewpoints based on the established groups of thought, I would also I'd like to get into some certain established philosophers' viewpoints, starting most importantly with Judith Jarvis Thompson on her take on the trolley problem, as I think it's one of the most famous takes and one of the most well-renowned and known takes on the trolley problem. So Judith Jarvis Thompson was an American philosopher who wrote extensively on ethical theory and particularly interested in moral dilemmas. In her paper, The Trolley Problem, published in 1985, Thompson presented a nuanced view on the issue. Thompson argued that there are two types of cases in the trolley problem scenario: those where the person who must make the decision is directly involved, and those where they are not. In the cases where the decision maker is not directly involved, Thompson claimed that it is morally permissible to pull the lever to divert the trolley. She argued that in this scenario, the person pulling the lever is not causing harm to anyone, but is simply choosing the lesser of two evils. So she's choosing to kill one person over five. By diverting the trolley, she is saving the five lives at the cost of the one. However, in cases where decision making or where the decision maker is directly involved, Thompson argued that the situation is more complicated. She introduced a second hypothetical scenario in which a person is standing on a bridge over the trolley track, and the only way to save the five people is to push the large person off the bridge to stop the trolley. Thompson argued that in this scenario, it would be morally impermissible to push the person off the bridge, even though doing so would save the five lives. The reason for this, according to Thompson, is that the person who is pushed off the bridge is being used as a mean to an end. In other words, their life is being sacrificed for the sake of others, and this violates their dignity and autonomy. I think this is very interesting because in this view, Thompson seems to differentiate um, the one person in each scenario. So the one person in the original trolley problem is tied to a track just by their lonesome, and we are pulling a lever to choose to kill them over the five, to save the five people. In our second scenario, rather than pulling the lever, we are pushing someone to stop the trolley. And Thompson argues that there actually is a difference in this, which I think is interesting because in my eyes, I think that it is um, fundamentally the same thing. Pulling the lever and pushing the person is fundamentally the same thing, but Thompson disagrees. So now that we know that Thompson's view and her thoughts on the trolley problem, let's think about it for a little bit. I think we can all agree that with the basic trolley problem, it's easy. It's an easy decision to pull the lever and divert the trolley to the track with only one person on it, versus to save the five people tied. But it gets interesting when she adds in the twist of having to push a man down the trolley. I think this changes a lot of our answers to the trolley problem, as even though it's the same thought experiment as I explained before, with the same concepts, it becomes much more personal as we have to actually push someone onto the tracks, and therefore harder for us to make the decision on who to save, even if it's still saving five people and only sacrificing one, solely because it made it more personal and almost made us feel at fault for the death of the one for saving the five, while saving the one and killing the five by pulling the lever has no fault of anyone whatsoever in our hearts, as I think as a general population we would think that. I think this is an important concept to the trolley problem, and I want us to remember this concept here in a little bit. But first, I would like to introduce the views of another well-known philosopher named Rick Costi. So Rick Costi, he has also a essay where he describes his thoughts. But I think most importantly in his essay is his example that he gave in his solution. So Costi suggests a new scenario in his essay called A Solution to the Trolley Problem, where you're a director of a hospital and there are five patients suffering from a unique fatal organ failure and no donors whatsoever are available. However, a healthy patient with just a sprained ankle had just been admitted to the ER of the hospital you are director of. So, if you were to harvest this patient organs, you could save the lives of the five patients, but ultimately you'd kill the one patient who came in with just a sprained ankle. In this case, um, utilitarianism would still suggest that it is morally justifiable to sacrifice the healthy patient to save the lives of the five patients who are in need of a organ transplant. However, Costi argues against this view, stating that sacrificing one life for the many is not morally justifiable. A society that condones he continues by arguing that as a society that condones the involuntary sacrifice of individuals would not survive for long. Costi believes that morality has evolved with humanity, and the idea of sacrificing just one person to save many against their will goes against our sense of personal liberty and would not be accepted. The immediate benefits of sacrificing one person to save many are clear, but the long-term effects are not too great. Therefore, Costi concludes that we should not make the sacrifice of one life for the good of many as a have the good of many a part of to value our system. So that's Costi's point of view. I think this makes a lot of sense, and I really like his um, change to the thought experiment in the trolley, how he changes it to the hospital, because I think that makes it really hit home for us because it makes it much more relatable, even though it's the same fundamentals as the trolley thought experiment. So in both cases, Costi and Tossman's views of the trolley problem, they both change the circumstances of the problem while keeping the same thought experiment or the same fundamentals of the trolley program. And our views on what the correct decision may be drastically changed in both of those alternate thought experiments compared to the original, even though they're fundamentally the same thought experiment. When the situation becomes more than just pulling a lever and gets more personal, we as humans tend to lean toward no action at all, even if it means having the five people killed compared to the one. I think this represents um, the closest in our world today is Cassie's hospital example, as I don't think that I have ever met anyone who would take the life of an unwilling man who just came into the yard with a sprained ankle to save 5 people who are in dire need of an organ transplant. Both of the examples and views of Costi and Thompson both point to the same conclusion, in my opinion, and that is that it is better off for our morality as a whole to not change the events of the trolley, even in the original trolley program, taking into account the other examples mentioned in this podcast, and that being Thompson's pushing the man off the bridge example and Costi's hospital example. And I say this as it will have a severe impact on society. Costi does a good job explaining this um, in his view, as he states that this will have a lasting impact on our society as it opens the door to possibilities of sacrificing one for the benefits of many others, which is not a good societal rule of thumb. He explains this well when he states in his essay, like stated before, the same essay, Solution of the Trolley Problem. He states, quote, that advocates the involuntary sacrificing of people are many. For one, our group's sense of personal liberty would rally against a society that casts those liberties aside. It is one thing to remove or quarantine a cancerous cell, as we do in an incarcerated criminal. It is another thing to eradicate or quarantine a healthy cell because the surrounding cells might enjoy more resources. In fact, the analogies are endless, but I think you get the point. End quote. And I think that's a really good analogy too that he uses. That it may make sense when you are isolating and getting rid of a cancerous cell to benefit the healthy cells around it, but isn't it just the same uh, thing to get rid of a healthy cell to benefit the other healthy cells around it? It really is the same thing. When you take away the personal identity of the people on the tracks or the personal identity of the hospital patients in Costi's example. So I think we all do get the point. Um, After diving deep into this trolley problem, I would have to say that my views on the solution to the problem lie very close to Rick Costi. As even though it makes sense to pull the lever to save the 5 and only kill the 1 in the original example, you must look at the lasting impacts and a decision like that makes, and overlook the short-term benefits. And I think that's really what makes me align with Costi's, because he's one of the only people that looks at the long-term um, impacts of that and with the society and sacrificing people and stuff like that. And it really comes detrimental just to save 5 people. It turns into sacrificing many more, and that's not a good idea. Um, so yeah, with all that, I think we're out of time for today's show. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for listeners, and I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for coming in to learn and listen about the trolley problem. And yeah, I hope you guys all have a good night, and we will see you next week.